This is interesting. I don't think I've seen a New Zealand Haka before. Everybody seems to be talking about this right now. If you do a simple search on the subject, you can see that CNN, BBC, Washington Post, etc. Everybody's in on it. So I thought, why not figure out what's going on?
The Treaty of Waitangi is superior to any person and any law ever created in this House. It is the constitutional document. By this House and democracy is established here in Aotearoa. This Parliament means nothing in Aotearoa without the Treaty of Waitangi. The only reason this Parliament exists in Aotearoa is because our tipuna consented to it. The only people who can make changes in an agreement are the parties who signed it.
Yeah, this is kind of ridiculous, isn't it?
The House is suspended until the ringing of the bells. The gallery is to be cleared.
So, this is apparently a Maori haka, turns out. And they did that to disrupt the vote on a contentious bill to reinterpret an 184-year-old treaty between the British and indigenous Maori. Now, that doesn't seem to be quite correct. They're not trying to reinterpret the treaty, rather they're trying to reinterpret the legislation that sprung out around the treaty, I suppose. At least that's what they are claiming. Essentially, they're saying that there was this treaty in 1840 between British Crown and more than 500 Maori chiefs, the Treaty of Waitangi, right? And it lays down how the two parties agreed to govern. The interpretation of clauses in the document still guides legislation and policy today. Ruling by the courts and a separate Maori tribunal have progressively expanded Maori rights and privileges over the decades. So this is not necessarily what was in the treaty, but rather what sprang out around the treaty since it was signed. However, some argue this has discriminated against non-Indigenous citizens. The ACT New Zealand Party, a junior partner in the ruling centre-right coalition government, proposed a bill to enshrine a narrower interpretation of the Waitangi Treaty in law. Well, what does that mean? Who are the ACT Party? What do they want? This is their website, so that we can find out. So, the ACT believes every child born in New Zealand deserves the same respect and dignity, including equality before the law. The Treaty Principles Bill would restore the manner of our founding document by ensuring it delivers what it originally promised in 1840, the same rights and duties for all New Zealanders. So, essentially it has 3 articles. And the first one, the New Zealand government has the right to govern all New Zealanders. What this means to me is that currently there are some things that the government essentially can't govern, which is to say the indigenous population can decide for themselves outside of government. Meanwhile, the non-indigenous population is always under the control of the government, and obviously this kind of mismatch in terms of rights and sovereignty is not going to look good if you are the one not enjoying the benefits of it. Article 2. The New Zealand government will honor all New Zealanders in their chieftainship of their land and all their property. So again, assuming that you mean that this changes anything, then currently the government does not recognize your land ownership and property ownership in some cases if you're not married. I guess this is what this should mean, or at least the ACT Party claims it so. In Article 3, all New Zealanders are equal under the law with the same rights and duties. That one is particularly spicy because you're essentially saying that you currently live in a two-tier society where the Maori people have more rights and duty and less duties than you. Otherwise, there would be no need to enshrine this into law. So yes, if that is how people feel, they must be quite upset. But do they have reason for it? I'm not sure. I will say that none of these sound as though they are going to create an unfair society against the indigenous peoples. The language is quite clear in that they demand equality, not privileges against Maori, not privileges against any indigenous group. So, what it currently says here is, do New Zealanders not currently have equal rights? That's one of the questions. You can click on it to find out more. And I thought it was a very pertinent one because there's a lot of questions. We won't go through all of them. So, it says here that not currently have equal rights, not always. Creative interpretations of the principles of the treaty have been used to justify offering different access to taxpayer-funded services, guaranteed positions on government boards, and even a separate healthcare authority, all based on people's ancestry. So what are those principles? Well, the treaty stood for 135 years until 1975, when the then Labour government passed the Treaty of Waitangi Act. The Treaty of Waitangi Act stated the treaty had principles, and it was the job of the Waitangi Tribunal to interpret them. Since then, the tribunal, the courts, and the public service have gradually built up the principles, but New Zealanders as a whole have never been democratically consulted on these treaty principles. The Treaty Principles Bill will not change the treaty itself. That was set in 1840 and will remain forever. What we are seeking to do is continue the process of defining the treaty principles, for the first time incorporating the voices of all people through a democratic parliamentary process instead of through the tribunal or the courts. Okay, so like I said, it seems as though they're not trying to edit the original treaty, but rather a left-wing government in 1975 decided to sort of add an interpretation bill to it that broadens its scope over time slowly through the institutions, the bureaucracy, and the courts. And now a right-wing government says, hang on a minute, hold your horses, you don't get to do that. Let's return to a more strict adherence to the basic principles of the agreement. That's my interpretation of things. Obviously, if you are more on the left, you would say that it's the opposite somehow. I'm not quite sure, because essentially there was a left-wing government that created the idea of treaty principles that, could be changed over time. Presumably they do it in favor of their clientele class, the indigenous people, because that's how all left-wing government in the world today operate. They go to minorities as clientele classes and offer them specific policy catered to them in order to receive support in return. Now, what is the intention of the Treaty Principles Bill? The intention is to establish in law that the principles of the treaty are what the 3 articles of the treaty actually say: that the New Zealand government has the right to govern, that the authority and ownership of land and property of all New Zealanders is protected, and that all New Zealanders are equal under the law. These seem like perfectly good principles to me. The actual text of the treaty itself is a powerful guide for New Zealand's future, far from a divisive document that affords unique privileges to one group. Again, what we're saying here is right-wing people saying there are currently unique privileges for a specific segment of the population, and they want it remedied to have equality for all. I can't imagine how exactly you would take away basic rights from anyone under the idea that the government has the right to govern, the New Zealand government will honor the private property and land ownership of all people, and all people are equal under the law as long as they are, citizens. How is that divisive? How do you use that to take away anyone's rights? Can you figure out, I would very much like to hear, can you figure out how exactly you would use this document to be a bigot against anyone? Because I can't find out how. It seems impossible to me. Anyway, the thing is, this has been exceedingly divisive for the left and for essentially the sort of proponents of the minority class and the minority class itself, the indigenous Maori. And I just can't help but feel as though this is the same story over and over in pretty much every Western country. We see the same outcomes too. You can see that pretty much all Western countries are descending into debt. They have lower and lower health standards. Like, people are more and more sick despite ever increasing investments into healthcare. You can see that unemployment is rising in all of these countries. You can see that birth rates are plummeting. Something bad is happening in pretty much all Western countries. And it's kind of strange to me that you wouldn't take a long, hard look at left-wing policy because it's essentially universal. And meanwhile, you have right-wing parties that are very different in tone and flavor and that propose specific solutions that are quite different from each other. It's only ever the global left for some reason. Perhaps I am having my blinders on right now, but I can't help but feel that there are certain challenges that basically transcend time and place right now. They basically have been going on and escalating for decades now, and they have to be dealt with. And some of it is essentially all of the health problems that resulted from us playing with our food in terms of injecting all sorts of chemicals into it, getting into seed oils. That was a bad idea. Pollution in terms of nanoplastics, that sort of thing. That definitely has some part in it. There's also the fact that, in my opinion, we should return to the gold standard. The idea that we can just have a currency that is divorced from reality in a way. Essentially, you can print as much as you want and nothing bad will happen. That makes zero sense. And ever since we've done that, ever since we have abandoned the gold standard, you can see that the value of work has decreased and the value of playing with papers, aka investments and trading all sorts of stock, etc., has increased greatly. A larger percentage of money is earned through that. And, well, I think that the actual work is more important. I think that's what should be the bulk of our economy. It's not right now, and it hasn't been for a long time. And I guess what I'm trying to sort of equate here is we're dealing with a lot of division in our own countries due to them being multicultural, multiracial. And as a result of that, we can't deal with the problems that are sort of defining our life in a bad way. We are constantly at odds with each other, and for no good reason. It should be settled once and for all that everyone has the same rights and duties, the same access to government taxpayer-funded programs, and the same protections under the law. And once we can finally agree on this basic principle that race, gender, etc., all of these immutable characteristics shouldn't in any way give you any benefits or any negatives, we can move past this division and actually try and solve the problems that are, causing us so much trouble that we are, for the first time, essentially since technology has sort of erupted, with computers and cell phones, smartphones, etc., that for the first time since then has seen us in decline in pretty much all metrics of life. We're talking about IQ, we're talking about life expectancy, we're talking about health outcomes in general. We had essentially an incredible increase in pretty much all metrics of life due to the Industrial Revolution, due to the ability to produce enough food for everyone, due to the ability to educate people in a far greater sort of diversity of means than before. It used to be that you only could ever go to a library or a university to study. Now you can just have access to the cumulative knowledge of human existence with your little tablet. And despite all of these advantages, despite the fact that work today is far more efficient than ever before, we're somehow getting less out of our lives. And I think this is sort of intended by the powers that be, essentially exceedingly rich multinational corporations and their bureaucrat friends. They are waging economic war against us, in my opinion. And we all know the names: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, Bill Gates, the usual suspects, the World Economic Forum. And they have been escalating it. The pandemic especially saw the largest wealth transfer in history from the working class, middle class, to the rich multinational corporations. And this is a diversion. This entire racial divide, gender divide, all the rest of it, the LGHTV and trans stuff, they are creating fictitious problems. We have been moving forward in all of these categories, the sort of social contract, for a very long time. And what they have done is agitate these minority groups, these sort of separate elements of society, getting it into their heads that they are hated and discriminated against, despite the fact that their rights have been equalized to that of the majority for basically the first time ever. And since then, they have been carrying a sort of vendetta against the majority population in all Western countries. And fighting back against that has consumed us to the detriment of fighting back against everything else that has been done to us. This cannot continue, and we definitely must settle this debate so that we can face the real problems of society together. And I sort of hope that what we're seeing with the American election, where a larger percentage of minorities than ever has voted for Donald Trump, who, in my opinion, is anathema to the system that's been, how to put it, instrumental in the economic and sort of health-related oppression of the general population. What I fear is not a free and fair competition between all people on equal ground. I think that's the best outcome possible. What I fear is a bureaucratic takeover where marriage of corporation and the state sort of expands their power through all sort of separate elements of society to the point where you can't escape them. They control everything. You can't even voice your position to them. And they maintain their rule by appealing to certain minority elements and getting them to go along with it in the name of sort of fixing historical injustices and guaranteeing their rights against the evil white, atheists, the people who think they're better because of their race. They essentially fearmonger these people and pander to them. They propagandize them. And that's been how they got their majorities for decades now. Another very important topic is that women, for the first time, I believe, in a very long time, voted for Donald Trump. I believe the majority of white women in general, the minority of black women, that was the one group. But we have to create a sort of universal voting bloc of people who just see through the lies of the system and band together to oppose it on the principle of equality and equal treatment under the law by the government, essentially. Not equity. Not all groups should end up with the same results. You can't guarantee that everybody will make the same choices. There will be differences based on culture, and there will be differences based on, I specifically mean between men and women, based on biological reality. You can't expect men and women to have the same outcomes given the same opportunities because they are physically, biologically different. And I'm talking about the sort of chemical balance in the body. I'm talking about the shape of the brain, which does affect how we see the world, how we interact with it, what we are better or worse at doing. I understand that women should have an advantage in multitasking due to the shape of their brain on average. And I'm sure that men have something that they must be better geared towards as well. Definitely in terms of physical fitness, let's say, men have the advantage in almost all disciplines. that doesn't mean that anyone is better or worse in terms of the value to society or as a person. It doesn't mean that anyone should be discriminated against, but it does mean that if you give everybody an equal opportunity, then differences in biological reality or in, let's say, cultural proclivities are going to be affecting the result. And what we should do is let people do what they are best at, and in terms of cultures, we should allow cultures to evolve. If a certain culture has fallen behind for whatever reason, then let them figure it out. Find out what they could be doing better and incorporate the specific solutions into their culture so that they can compete once again. You know, history has not been a story of the oppression of all peoples by whites. There have been many empires that were not by white people. They are not the eternal winners of history. It's just their turn. So instead of trying to pander to the people who are currently not at the head of the most successful and flourishing societies in the world, which would only, in my opinion, impede them from being competitive against, just treat everybody equally, give everybody equal opportunity as much as you can. Obviously, you can't give a child born to essentially parents who have passed on or parents who are very poor the same opportunities that a child born to a very healthy and financially stable family would have. You can't do that without abolishing the idea of family altogether. The idea of inheritance, the idea of letting people raise their children. And this is fundamental to society, and we shouldn't oppose that. But we can give at the very least, minimum opportunity to every child. And we should strive to have that minimum opportunity be sufficient that if they work hard, they will have a very good chance to succeed. That should be our standard. We should not discriminate based on race for any reason. That's my opinion. Thanks for watching, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.